Explain like I'm 5. How are so many ancestors possible? Posted elsewhere but would like explained like I'm 5. What I can't get my head around is I had 2 parents. They had 4 in total who would have had 8 in a geometric progression. So going back even 1,000 years or 20 generations, assuming an average lifespan of 50 years, is 2,097,152 ancestors for just me. And given that there is a reported 7.9 billion people on Earth alive today, it seems mathematically impossible that all those people could have existed. You are almost correct. But you are forgetting a simple fact. The more you go back, the more likely it is that some of you ancestors were on both sides of the family. As in, some generations ago there was a couple who is the great-great-grandparent of both you father and you mother. The more you go back, the more such couples there are. You share a lot of those ancestors with other people. I have 2 parents. And my sister has 2 parents. But that doesn't mean that 4 people needed to exist, it's just the same 2 people for both of us. Likewise, your last 500 ancestors are also the ancestors of thousands of other people too. There are 2 parts to the answer. People share ancestors. Siblings have the same parents. They have parents who may have had siblings. People breed with cousins of various levels of remove. Some people didn't breed at all. It's not just a simply forever dividing tree. Secondly, there are 8 billion people alive today. There have been 100 billion Homo sapiens since the species arrived. For just me is incorrect. Most of your ancestors are also other people's ancestors. Do you have any siblings? That means even one generation of ancestors ago wasn't for just you. Any cousins? The next generation of ancestors was for even more people. The further you go back, the more people had the same ancestors. And that doesn't even account for having ancestors in both sides of the family tree. There's a lot of inbreeding. People marrying North cousins. An extreme example, it's estimated that the 12 million Ashkenazi Jews alive today are descended from apx. 350 individuals who lived around 1350 AD with 0.5 outside DNA per generation. All of them are no more distant than sixth cousins. You aren't the only person related to your ancestors. Those 2 million people are related to millions of people living today. Long ago, people had to have quite a bit of sex to survive the war of attrition against disease and whatnot. And also probably cause they didn't know when to stop. Your numbers are correct. But the missing piece of the puzzle is that some of them are the same people. Your great to the nth grandparent on your mother's side might also be your great to the mth grandparent on your father's side. Not only that, a generation isn't how long someone lived. It's how long until they have kids. 25-year generations is more realistic even conservatively than 50-year generations. Which works out to 40 generations over 1,000 years. 240 easily 1.1 trillion grandparents in the last 1,000 years. If you don't think every human being is inbred, how do you work out the math that you had 1.1 trillion grandparents in the last 1,000 years and there have only been 117 billion humans ever? Everyone has people in multiple slots on their family tree. You get to many of the same ancestors via various routes. So the same person may both be your mother's great-great-grandfather and also your father's great-great-great-grandfather. There's a lot of overlap. You go back long enough and there's one person who is the ancestor of millions of people alive today. Another thing is that number seems big compared to the population. But hundreds of thousands of people die every day. It's not all different people. Some of your ancestors already had ancestors in common. Meaning your personal number of ancestors is exponentially very large, but the number of people on Earth is the same. We have the same answer repeated many times. I would like to present an alternative theory. There are people who claim to have been abducted by aliens, analyzed and then been restored. Some have even claimed to have been impregnated by these aliens while abducted. Large-scale impregnation by aliens would explain our problem. It would also explain my cousin Marvin's massive overbite, and how his frighteningly ugly mother managed to get pregnant. The further you go back, the more duplicates and overlap there will be. Go back a couple hundred years and you have ancestors marrying cousins. Go back a couple thousand years and you may have multiple instances of one person occupying thousands of positions in the tree. This phenomenon is called pedigree collapse. Philip José Farmer explained this exact scenario in his Riverworld series of books that started in the early 70s. People die. A lot. Like all the time. Before you're done reading this reply. People died. Humans have been around for couple hundreds of thousands of years. Probably been a few 100 billion people in those years. To put that in perspective, it would take you roughly 3 days to count to 1 million. It would take you 30 years to count to 1 billion. Ancestor lines collapse in case of close cousins having children. My great-grandfather married his cousin. So they had many of the same ancestors. Think of it less as an upside-down pyramid. The tip is you and it expands as you go toward the base, where everyone has their own separate pyramid, and rather think of it as you are one of the corners of the base of a right-side-up pyramid. Other people are the other base corners and you all share one pyramid, and all your trees merge to the pyramid point. Edit for slight clarity, although this metaphor may not help you if visuals are not your method of comprehension. Hold up. Don't we all just trace back to Jesus? I believe your numbers are wrong. You don't have kids every 50 years. The kids happen from 10 to 50. Yeah. 10. We hopefully are mostly civilized now. But go back to the past and people were having children a lot earlier. And dying a lot earlier. So 20 generations could be as early as merely 200 years. A family tree shows the descendants starting from a particular pair of people, and it branches down and outwards as the new generations are born and coupled. However, it doesn't work that simply when you want to do a reverse family tree. If you go in reverse, you end up with more of a tangled web than a tree with random connections between the various branches. Personally, I would love to do this kind of reverse family tree, but I have zero knowledge of any of my ancestors beyond my grandparents due to WW2. Those ancestors are spread out over hundreds of thousands of years, just counting your Homo sapiens ancestors. Or even up to 2.4 million years counting from the first hominid. The amount of people alive at a given time, like the 7.9 billion today, is barely related to that number. You are comparing two values that have very little in common. Which makes answering your question not about calculations or evolutionary processes, but about your very human and very common difficulty to grasp large time frames.